You are walking through an ancient forest after a night of steady rain. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. Shafts of morning sunlight struggle to reach the ground beneath towering trees. Everywhere you look, life seems to be waking up. Then you notice them. Tiny umbrellas pushing through the moss, clusters of pale caps growing from a fallen log, brilliant red domes standing out against the dark forest floor like warning signs. You haven't eaten since yesterday. The hunt has failed. Winter is still weeks away, but food is never guaranteed. One careful decision could fill your stomach. One careless decision could end your life. You kneel beside the mushrooms, your hand hovering just above them. No labels, no guidebooks, no one to tell you which ones are safe. Somewhere in humanity's distant past, someone faced this exact moment for the very first time, and the choice they made may have begun one of the oldest relationships between humans and the natural world. Most people assume mushrooms became part of the human diet only after farming transformed human society, but the evidence suggests a far older story. Long before fields of wheat, before villages, and perhaps even before Homo sapiens became the only surviving human species, our ancestors were already exploring the mysterious world of fungi, learning, through countless generations of observation, which mushrooms could nourish them and which demanded lifelong caution. When people picture prehistoric meals, they usually imagine something familiar: a hunter carrying home a deer, a family roasting meat over an open fire, women and children gathering berries along a riverbank, perhaps a handful of nuts, maybe wild roots dug from the earth. Rarely does anyone imagine mushrooms, yet for millions of years, forests across Africa, Europe, and Asia have produced them in astonishing abundance. Every rainy season, they emerged from fallen trees, decaying leaves, and rich woodland soil. Unlike fruits that grew on the same branches year after year, mushrooms appeared almost like magic. One day, the forest floor was empty. The next morning, dozens of fleshy caps had seemingly risen from nowhere. To ancient humans, this must have looked almost supernatural. Of course, we now understand what was really happening. The mushroom itself is only the visible fruiting body of a much larger organism hidden underground. Vast networks of microscopic threads, known as mycelium, quietly spread beneath the soil, breaking down dead organic matter and recycling nutrients back into the forest. Long before humans ever noticed a mushroom, the fungus had already been living beneath their feet. In many ways, forests were never simply collections of trees. They were enormous living systems, held together by fungi. Without them, many ecosystems as we know them simply could not exist. Ancient humans almost certainly had no understanding of this hidden biology. But they didn't need to. They only needed to notice one simple fact. After rain came mushrooms, and after mushrooms came an opportunity for food. Chapter 2. The most dangerous meal in the forest. Unfortunately, nature rarely gives gifts without asking for something in return. Mushrooms are among the most deceptive foods on Earth. Some species are rich in nutrients. Others are completely harmless but nearly inedible, and a few contain toxins powerful enough to cause severe illness or death. The truly unsettling part is how similar they can look. Even today, experienced mushroom hunters sometimes spend several minutes examining a single specimen before deciding whether to collect it. Shape, color, texture, gills, smell, the type of tree growing nearby. All of these details can matter. Prehistoric humans had none of this scientific knowledge. They had only memory. Imagine a small family wandering through the forest after several days of rain. A child spots unfamiliar mushrooms beneath an old oak tree. An adult decides to try one. Perhaps nothing happens. Months later, another mushroom appears that looks almost identical. This time, the result is very different. No written records preserve these moments. No archaeological site can tell us how many mistakes were made. But it would be remarkable if early humans had learned to recognize edible mushrooms without painful trial and error. Knowledge was not purchased with books. It was purchased with experience. Sometimes expensive experience. Over thousands of generations, families remembered which mushrooms were safe. Communities remembered where they grew. Children watched older relatives harvest only certain species while deliberately ignoring others. Bit by bit, experience became tradition, and tradition became survival. Humans are not the strongest animals. We are not the fastest. We do not have the sharpest teeth, nor the thickest fur. So how did our ancestors survive in landscapes filled with predators, poisonous plants, and unpredictable climates? The answer was never strength alone. It was shared knowledge. One person discovers, another remembers. The next generation improves upon both. Few foods demonstrate this process better than mushrooms. Unlike large animals that could be chased or fruits that could often be recognized at a glance, mushrooms demanded patience, observation, conversation, teaching. A grandmother showing a child which mushrooms to pick, a hunter warning others about dangerous lookalikes, a family returning to the same forest every rainy season because they remembered what grew there. This kind of knowledge could not remain inside one person's mind. It had to become part of the group's collective memory. Anthropologists studying modern foraging societies have repeatedly observed that ecological knowledge is often among the most valuable forms of cultural inheritance. Although today's hunter-gatherers are not direct windows into prehistoric life, they demonstrate how information about edible plants and fungi can be preserved across generations without written language. That ability may have been one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Because survival did not depend only on finding food. It depended on remembering where to find it next year. But how can scientists possibly know whether prehistoric humans actually ate mushrooms? Unlike bones or stone tools, mushrooms leave almost no trace. They rot quickly. Within days, they begin to disappear. Within weeks, they may leave almost nothing behind. For archaeologists, this creates an enormous problem. The absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. Fortunately, ancient humans occasionally left behind clues in unexpected places. One of the most remarkable is dental calculus, the hardened plaque that forms on teeth over a lifetime. Although it may seem insignificant, this material can preserve microscopic fragments of food, pollen, starch grains, plant fibers, and other tiny particles for thousands of years. In some prehistoric individuals, researchers have identified microscopic evidence suggesting that wild plants and fungi formed part of their diet. These findings must be interpreted carefully, because identifying ancient microscopic remains is often difficult, but together they point toward a long history of interaction between humans and fungi. Another fascinating clue comes from one of archaeology's most famous discoveries. Around 5,300 years ago, a man now known as Ötzi the Iceman died high in the Alps, where his body remained naturally preserved in ice. Among his belongings were pieces of several different fungi. Researchers generally agree that at least some of these mushrooms were probably carried for practical purposes rather than simply as food. One species may have been useful for helping start fires, while another has been discussed for possible medicinal or functional uses. Whatever their exact purpose, one conclusion seems difficult to escape. By 5,000 years ago, humans already knew mushrooms well enough to recognize specific species, collect them intentionally, and carry them across long journeys. That level of familiarity almost certainly did not appear overnight. It was probably the result of thousands of years of accumulated experience. Experience passed from one generation to the next, long before anyone ever thought of writing it down. No one knows the name of the first person who intentionally ate a wild mushroom. History never recorded it. Archaeology probably never will. But sooner or later, someone had to make that decision. Perhaps it was a hungry hunter returning empty-handed. Perhaps it was a child curious about strange shapes growing after the rain. Or perhaps it was someone who had watched animals nibbling at mushrooms and wondered if humans could do the same. Whatever the moment looked like, it almost certainly wasn't a single discovery. It was thousands of tiny discoveries spread across countless generations. Some ended well. Others almost certainly did not. Unlike inventing fire or making stone tools, learning about mushrooms could never happen all at once. Every forest contained different species. Every region had its own climate. Every season produced something new. Knowledge that worked in one valley might become dangerously unreliable in another. That meant every migrating group had to begin learning all over again. As humans slowly expanded across Africa, into the Middle East, throughout Europe, across Asia, and eventually into Australia and the Americas, they entered forests unlike any their ancestors had known. New trees, new animals, new plants, and new fungi. Each landscape presented an entirely different puzzle. Yet, over thousands of years, our ancestors kept solving it. Not because they understood fungi, but because they never stopped observing nature. When people think about cooking, they usually imagine meat. A fresh kill roasting over glowing embers, fat dripping into the flames, smoke rising into the evening sky. But fire transformed much more than animal food. It changed the way humans interacted with plants, and very likely, with mushrooms as well. Many edible mushrooms become softer, easier to digest, and more enjoyable after cooking. Heat also removes excess moisture, concentrates flavor, and makes many species safer to eat by destroying naturally occurring compounds that can irritate the digestive system. Of course, cooking cannot make poisonous mushrooms safe. Modern science strongly warns that some toxins remain dangerous even after boiling, roasting, or drying. Ancient humans had no way of knowing the chemistry involved, but they could observe results. Some mushrooms tasted better after being heated. Some became easier to chew. Others caused problems regardless of how they were prepared. Over generations, these observations gradually shaped tradition. Fire did something else as well. It made meals social. People gathered around the flames. Stories were told. Experiences were shared. Warnings were repeated. A successful meal became tomorrow's lesson. A dangerous mistake became tomorrow's warning. In that sense, every campfire may have served as both a kitchen and a classroom. Long before schools existed, long before writing preserved knowledge, the fire itself became a place where survival was taught. As human societies became larger and more organized, mushrooms gradually found new places in everyday life. They were no longer viewed only as emergency food gathered after rainfall. Different cultures began assigning different meanings to them. Across Europe, many communities developed long traditions of seasonal mushroom gathering. Families returned to familiar forests year after year, collecting species they had trusted for generations. In East Asia, several mushrooms eventually became valued not only for their flavor, but also for their role in traditional cuisine and medicine. Ancient Chinese texts discuss certain fungi, although historians continue to study exactly how these traditions developed over time. Elsewhere, archaeological evidence and historical records suggest that mushrooms occasionally appeared in religious practices or symbolic traditions. The details differed greatly from one culture to another. Some societies admired mushrooms, others feared them. Many simply ignored species they could not identify with confidence. What remained remarkably consistent was humanity's respect for uncertainty. Even communities with centuries of experience rarely assumed that every mushroom was safe. Knowledge was always accompanied by caution. That cautious attitude survived for thousands of years, and in many places, it still survives today. Ironically, ancient humans spent thousands of years collecting mushrooms without realizing they were seeing only a tiny fraction of the organism itself. Modern biology has revealed something extraordinary. The mushroom growing above the ground is only the reproductive structure. The real organism often lives below the surface as an immense network of microscopic filaments called mycelium. Some of these underground networks stretch across astonishing distances. They connect plant roots, recycle nutrients, support forest ecosystems, and help shape the environments upon which countless other species depend. In other words, when prehistoric humans bent down to pick a mushroom, they were touching only the smallest visible part of something far larger, a hidden kingdom that had already existed for hundreds of millions of years before humans ever appeared. Without fungi, forests would struggle to recycle dead wood efficiently. Nutrients would remain trapped. Entire ecosystems would function differently. Humans depended on forests. Forests depended on fungi. Whether our ancestors realized it or not, they were living inside an ecological partnership that had been quietly operating since long before mammals evolved. And that relationship continues today. Every walk through a forest is also a walk above an invisible living network, one that has always been there, quietly supporting life beneath our feet. If mushrooms were only another source of food, their story would have ended long ago. But they became something more. They revealed one of humanity's greatest strengths, the ability to learn from uncertainty. Every mushroom represented a question. Is it safe? Will it provide nourishment? Or will it cause harm? Unlike many other foods, there was rarely an obvious answer. The forest demanded patience. It rewarded careful observation rather than confidence. And over thousands of generations, humans became remarkably good at noticing patterns. Which species appeared beneath oak trees? Which emerged after several days of rain? Which grew on dead wood instead of living trunks? Which returned to the same places year after year? These observations may seem ordinary today, but together they represent something extraordinary: the birth of ecological intelligence. Long before formal science existed, humans were already conducting experiments, not in laboratories, but in forests. Not with notebooks, but with memory. Every successful discovery became knowledge. Every dangerous mistake became a lesson. And every generation inherited a little more understanding than the one before it. That process still defines humanity today. Science itself is, in many ways, an extension of the same instinct. Observe carefully, question assumptions, test ideas, learn from the results, then teach someone else. Equal sign. Despite centuries of scientific research, fungi remain one of the least understood kingdoms of life. Biologists estimate that millions of fungal species may exist on Earth, yet only a fraction have been formally described. Every year, researchers continue discovering species that were previously unknown to science. Some live deep underground, others survive in deserts. Some thrive in Arctic environments, others inhabit tropical rainforests. Many remain almost completely unexplored. The archaeological record is equally mysterious. Because mushrooms decay so quickly, direct evidence of prehistoric mushroom use is exceptionally rare. Most of what we know comes from tiny fragments preserved under extraordinary conditions, combined with ecological reasoning and comparisons across multiple scientific fields. That means many questions remain unanswered. Did early Homo erectus regularly eat mushrooms? How much did Neanderthals rely on fungi in different environments? Were certain species collected only for food, or also for practical purposes, such as fire-making, medicine, or preserving materials? Researchers continue investigating these questions, and each new discovery has the potential to reshape our understanding of the human past. Sometimes, history is not rewritten by finding a lost city. Sometimes it changes because someone discovers a microscopic fragment trapped inside a prehistoric tooth. Today, most people encounter mushrooms in supermarkets. Clean, packaged, clearly labeled. It is easy to forget that for almost all of human history, every mushroom had to be found in the wild. That experience demanded attention, respect, and patience. Modern science has revealed countless new roles for fungi. Some are essential in producing foods such as cheese, soy sauce, and bread through the action of yeast and other fungi. Others contribute to the development of medicines, including several important antibiotics derived from fungal organisms. Researchers are also exploring how fungi might help recycle waste, restore damaged ecosystems, and create new sustainable materials. At the same time, scientists continue to caution that many wild mushrooms remain difficult to identify correctly. Even today, experienced foragers rely on careful knowledge rather than guesswork. In that sense, one lesson has never changed. Nature rewards curiosity. But it also demands humility. The same forest that offers nourishment can also remind us how much we still do not know. Now, Imagine yourself standing once again in that ancient forest. The rain has stopped. The air is still. Tiny mushrooms rise silently from the moss, just as they have for millions of years. You reach toward one of them, not because you understand everything about it, but because countless generations before you spent their lives learning what they could. They observed, they remembered, they taught, and slowly, almost invisibly, they transformed uncertainty into knowledge. The first person who tasted a wild mushroom never imagined they were helping write the story of humanity. Yet, in a way, they were. Because the history of mushrooms is not really about fungi. It is about curiosity. It is about memory. And above all, it is about the remarkable human ability to keep learning from a world that still holds more mysteries than answers.